Good evening, welcome to MOTS presents MOTS Ado About Nothing.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
Where we apply the revolutionary MOTS scale to classic and contemporary literature.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
This podcast contains mature content, spoilers, language. You have been warned.
Hello, and welcome back to the Lost Signals literary show, MOTS Ado About Nothing. In the original cut of this, we had some technical issues right at the front, so I am just re-recording the intro right now. I was your host for this episode, and I was joined by Jonathan Ian Manzer, Scott Thurlow, and Veronica Hernandez, and now we will return you to the beginning of the show.
Today we have a short story by O. Henry, a famed short story writer from American history. And this one is, with no exception to his other works, kind of has a little twist ending at the end. It's kind of what he was known for. So, without much further ado, I'm going to kick it off to Scott for a little synopsis.
Sure. The Gift of the Magi is about two broke idiots who give each other the worst Christmas present ever.
And for an actual synopsis of what goes on, we're going to kick it over to Ian.
All right. So this is a very famous short story, and the twists and themes have been done to death since this was created, and even before it was created. But the premise is that a wife is looking for a Christmas present. They're poor. They don't have a lot of money. So they have two great gifts, or each one of the husband and the wife each possess a gift that they're very proud of. She has luxurious hair that is kind of like the envy of everyone, and he possesses a pocket watch that I believe was his grandfather's, and he's very proud of. So she ends up cutting her hair and selling it in order to buy him a chain, only to find out when he comes home that he sold his watch to buy her these ornate clips for her hair. So they both have like a laugh, and it's a loving, touching.
Isn't that special?
Exactly.
It's super cute. All right, so that's basically what the story's about.
Yep.
We're going to go over to Veronica to start off our discussion of the introduction. So go ahead, Veronica.
I don't know this author. This is actually the first time I've read this short story, so
Really? Hold on, real quick. They never read this in high school or anything like that?
Never. It was never
Wow.
mentioned to me, so thinking back, what Ian said, that it was done to death after it was first published, is really interesting to me, because I can see a lot of the styles just in the first introduction, right off the bat. The very first sentence is so important, really, to kind of put you into kind of the style of the short story. The introduction is actually started off with $1.87. That was all, which immediately brought me to like a different just thought process of, I thought this was going to be something magical just by the title, and then it started talking about
Thought it was magical
money.
realism based on the title. It's just
Honestly,
really interesting that you've never read this before, never encountered it.
Never, but the first sentence, everything I thought I was going to start reading just went out the window. And I really have to say that the first paragraph, putting yourself into a position with someone that's, really counting pennies, pinching pennies, literally, is what he's describing, was a really, really good way to set the mood for the rest of the story. So I am a big fan of this introduction.
So you classify the first paragraph as the whole introduction.
I certainly think that it put me in the mindset for the rest of the story.
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right, let's be clear. This is a very short story. It's probably like 500 words or less. What do you think? Maybe 1,000 words tops.
Yeah, it's probably about 1,000.
It's very famous, apparently, though Veronica's never encountered it before, but it is fairly well known. I read it a number of times, and I will give my full disclosure. I am not the biggest fan of this story, never actually was, and through the years got less out of it. But, I mean, yeah, it's a famous story, but I think to the issue at hand, I will agree with E that the opening paragraph, essentially, including like the first sentence and up to the conclusion of the first paragraph, would have to be an introduction, because it's so short to count anything more, I would think.
I actually want to cut off the conversation for a second to bring up. Have you ever read The Ransom of Red Chief?
No.
All right, that's another one of his major works that I think I read that in elementary school. So
Yeah, I don't know what school you went to, but
yeah, so I've actually read everything O. Henry's done because I had a collection of short stories. So he's been ever present in my life. So it's weird to me to find something like it seems like an American tradition to actually have read something by him.
I'm not American, so.
Oh, come on.
but
When did you come to America?
for the record, O. Henry is all I kept hearing Steve-O or Steve or Normosi say over and over again before we started this, I guess, review of the story. And I kept thinking, comical character. For some reason, Santa Claus popped up in my head. I don't know why.
well, it's a Christmas story, so maybe you had known
But
that by
before
osmosis.
I even read the story, he said, "Oh, Henry," and I'm thinking Santa, and then it just so happens to have to do with the Christmas.
Well, it's fun because O. Henry is actually based off of his experiences in being in prison and the guards' names that were listed with the first initial and then the last name. So it's a pseudonym, and he based that off of that. So yeah, you think it's funny if you think it's like a cheery name, but actually very much like O. Henry has this kind of dark edge to a very light style. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I like that description.
That is,
Like,
I would have to say, yeah.
it's difficult, like, to, again, because of the nature of being so short and perhaps the stigma that I attach to it, because of my familiarity with it. I guess I'll save what I'm going to say for a couple of questions in. So let's just do our scores in the intro. Or Steve, you have anything else to add about it?
No, not really. The intro, I think it does a good job of setting up what's to come. It gives you an immediate jump into, where the characters are at, or where at least Della, the wife in the story, is at. So I think it did a good job. I'm going to give it a 1. Veronica?
1, 2.
All right. Ian?
I'm going to give it a 1 specifically for the fact that I really like his use of language and some very advanced kind of vocabulary in what is often, like, when you think about this story, it doesn't seem as complex as it oftentimes is linguistically.
Right.
So I have to give it credit for that. And stylistically, I like his kind of offhanded observer touch to him.
Well, I was going to say that goes into style, which, of course, we'll speak about later on. But I don't want to say I want to give it a begrudging 1, but maybe just less of a 1. But I still think it is a good intro.
Okay.
Regardless.
All right. Well, that's going to move us on to the body. And we're going to start off with Ian on that one.
All right. So the introduction established that Della has been scrimping and saving in order to buy her husband a present. And the body really is her journey of deciding to cut her hair and finding the present. I would say that when the husband comes home is the end of the body.
I definitely agree with that.
Conclusion. I actually had a slight problem with it, and perhaps this is because of the era it was written in, but Della is very kind of subservient to her husband throughout the body to a point when I felt bad for her, and like, it came across as throughout the entire body this kind of like, I want to sacrifice for my husband who I'm so happy to have.
I think that really was a sign of the times. Like, there's even a line in there that's something like, and she started like crying femininely or something like that. I don't remember the exact line, but it's something similar to that. And
something vaguely sexist.
So like that stuff, that stuff kind of struck me a little bit, but you can kind of brush past it, I think.
I really like the descriptions though of the time and the place. Her going to get her hair shorn for sale, and then having to come home and trying to, like, basically it being butchered and her trying to fix it as best as possible. There were some very interesting, like, little descriptions of that world that O. Henry. I know he was very prominent in New York, so this has a very first-hand kind of account of what it's like to live in New York at that time.
Right.
And I think that really comes across when he's writing.
Yeah, and her the whole description of her, like, window shopping and like, looking around,
or even when she's has this little sliver of a mirror, because that's all. You know how they are in those apartments. Of course, I don't, because I'm not. But I can still picture what these traditional, what is it, $8 a month flats would look like.
Fully furnished.
So
that's a deal.
Yeah.
I wish my flat was $8.
Seriously.
It would have been back then. But no, I mean, I agree that it's all very well described because of his excellent use of language and style, as we'll get to. But I agree with that. It carries the body well enough for me.
To your $8 flat, you'd have to be making $30 a month.
A week or whatever.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think that's, well, whatever.
Do the math in the conversion.
We're not going to get into how much I make, but...
All
right. Anybody else have anything to add about the body?
I'm going to just point out that was one of the first things that bothered me about this story, because every time that the wife is mentioned in the story, she's crying, she's emotional, she has to calm herself down, she needs to focus, she's flustered, she has to heat up her curling iron with the fire. I didn't even know they had curling irons in that time.
Yeah, they had curling irons.
So
we had to heat it up with a fire, of course.
I won't say that I'm judging so much as her having this all-consuming love for her husband and wanting to show that in some material, with much more meaning to it, because it's Christmas and it's a gift and it's supposed to show how much you appreciate this person and what they do. Clearly, he's the breadwinner in the family, but at the same time, it was so over the top, and maybe because she just sat there all day, kind of looking out windows and
that's what you did when you were a woman back in those days.
Well, that's what I'm saying, and I'm glad I don't live in that time.
I also think it's interesting that they told the entire story from her point of view, as opposed to telling his point, like his day of like going out and finding the eclipse and all that stuff. Because at the end of the story, it kind of seems like they had a similar journey. Or it's made to seem that way.
Yeah, that's sort of
even though I doubt that would actually be the case. I don't think that he probably went into a store and got the clips that she's been looking at for a while, and that was it. Like she spent the whole day on this.
But you can't say that for sure. But
it seems like they're equated at the end. However, O. Henry, when he's writing the story, chooses to focus on Della instead of James.
It's in a weird way. I feel like O. Henry doesn't know how to write women, and he's writing a very masculine version of, or masculine opinion about a woman.
Right.
So that's definitely what's happening. Seems obvious.
Yeah.
But even given that, like, still, I agree that it still carries itself perfectly fine.
Right. It carries it off, and I think the style of it helps with that. We'll talk about style later, but I think the style of it helps with that. Like, you kind of get lost in the language a lot. Anyway.
Sure.
The body.
I'm giving it a 1. Again,
One
softish,
for
but
Scott.
still perfectly fine, I guess. Nothing wrong with it, really.
I think I'm going to give it a 0.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to agree with you.
It's funny because I was considering, like, initially I thought I was going to score this badly just because, again, of my history with it. But, analyzing it at face value, I think it still stands.
I think it hasn't aged well, and that...
Well, I agree with that,
the
but I'll speak to
introduction
that later
established a world that was fine, and we'll get to the conclusion. But the body itself didn't age well, and it carries the story supposedly, but I don't know. I think that the strengths lie at the beginning and the end, and not in the.
I mean, I don't disagree with that. Like, I just don't think it collapses under like mediocrity, I guess.
Sure, but does it keep your attention?
Yeah, I think it does.
So, Veronica, you're going to give it a 0. I'm going to give it a 1. So that's 2 zeros and 2 1s on this one.
And the hater gives it a 1.
And we're going to move. We're going to move on to the twist, what O. Henry's known for, the conclusion. And Scott's going to kick us off there.
Yeah, it's such a crazy twist. But I mean, like, the thing is, again, it's like, it's an embodied cliche, but it wasn't at the time. So you sort of have to view it, give it credit, at least on that front, I would think. And yeah, it's a very famous one. Almost everyone knows it if you're familiar with the story, and you've seen things like it in many, many other forms. So yeah, I mean, that's sort of, again, the point of it. And I'm going to speak, jumping the gun a bit. This whole story is basically its own theme. Like, the theme is the story. Everything else in it, all the elements, just carry that theme. Right. And of course, the ending is basically the punchline to an absurd-ish kind of joke.
Yeah.
So, it's a dark slice of life, I guess, a good way that I like to describe it. And so that's fine. And yeah, I mean, again, he sort of, if not invented it, sort of made it popular.
Right.
So I'll have to give it credit on that front. And again, as I said earlier, since it's so short, that you arrive at it pretty quickly, and it still is impactful enough.
Yeah, I'll have to say that, yes, now this is an obvious, like, ironic twist waiting to happen the entire time. But having read this story when I was very young, I still remember being surprised by it the first time that I read it. And, that's not saying much. You can pretty much surprise a little kid with anything. But everyone that read this story at the time, I'm guessing, kind of felt the same way about it. Like, you don't see it coming if you haven't experienced
when reading it for the
100
first time, and nothing like it. Sure, that's what I was saying.
Exactly.
So I agree with that.
One of my major issues with the ending is that he sold his pocket watch. He'll never get his grandfather's pocket watch back. She'll grow her hair back. So in a sense, she comes out the winner in this exchange. overall. But jokes aside, I think that the way yes, it's a very cliched, tired twist.
Well, it is now.
But
is
the
what I'm
way
saying.
that he wrote it, kind of like his stylistic elements in the conclusion uplifted it, that it works even today. Because it has a kind of optimism to it. It has a kind of, maybe it's a little saccharine.
Mm-hmm.
That's my
but-
biggest issue with it, but sure.
But it works still. And
Yeah, well, that's one. I agree.
So
Yeah.
You know, it's that ironic twist without the heavy darkness of like, and then they got divorced or something like that. You know, it doesn't.
Well, that would be the modern version of it or
And
something.
I would also like to bring up there's a short epilogue at the end
Hmm.
that like talks about the gifts of the Magi and how you should appreciate each other and how these two were foolish, but they were the smarter fools. And
because they did it all for love.
right.
And isn't that what it's all about?
So like I kind of felt like that was O. Henry just lecturing at us about how we should live.
No, it was
basically.
him being like, in case you missed the moral of my story,
Yeah.
here is the moral of
Here
my
it
story.
is. Yeah, exactly.
I liked the conclusion. I think that, again, because of the body just kind of dragging on a little bit, the conclusion was kind of nice because you finally see these two characters having to come face to face with what they just gave up. And yet it seems there's a calm at the end of it, regardless of how you and I may react to it. I would be very upset. Thinking that I just gave up something that's important to me.
I thought you meant if you were a woman back in those days.
No.
Well, that too.
But thank
You've
you.
already,
So
she's
you-
already established
So
that.
you wouldn't fret over your husband's opinion of your hairstyle and all of that, which she does, which Della
Yeah.
Della.
does at length for a good paragraph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They describe all the emotions she's going through with worrying what her husband's going to think.
Sure, but more importantly, it's when he finally does see it. I think he's more upset at the fact that she's not going to be able to enjoy this gift that he.
Yeah,
I
of-
think
of
he
course,
wants to
that's
see that
the-
reaction. And
Point there, yeah.
but I'm just saying, it's that thing where it's such a fickle little thing. Yes, the hair will grow back, and maybe he'll get the pocket watch back. Let's just remain with that optimism. Why
If
not?
he pawned it, he can go back and buy it back from the pawn shop. or
Not if he
whatever.
gets $20 a month, which apparently is what he's earning. But
He
I
spent
mean,
his entire month's salary on it.
Either way.
the conclusion of the two sitting down and just being in each other's presence and appreciating the sacrifice that they did, I'll take it. It's a nice little end.
Sure, I think you said it pretty well, both of you, but it still stands, even if it seems cliche now, but it's
Right.
still pulled off well enough that it encapsulates its own moral, even without the unnecessary epilogue of spelling out the actual moral for you.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, and I don't know if anybody else has anything else to say, but I guess we'll start off with the scores. What are you giving it, Scott?
I'm giving it a 1.
Scott's giving it a 1. I'm going to give it a 1.
One.
A 1.
1 from Ian, 1 from Veronica, and that means we're moving on to themes, which I'm going to start off.
Do it up.
And this is a story about somebody, like two people who kind of want to give the people that they love something that's beyond their means to give, and doing anything, being willing to do anything to do it, and then the irony of being that foolish to give up something that's so important to you to to do that. And and it's kind of it kind of leaves it open as to whether or not that is foolish, because O. Henry himself at the end in the epilogue calls it foolish.
Yeah, but he says it's the
It's like
wisest form of a
yeah.
fool.
Right.
The idea of
Right.
sacrificing your own for the people you love.
He
Sacrificing
doesn't
your own
really
happiness.
He doesn't really think they're foolish. They're the ones who are happiest, even though this is the situation they're in. No, that's basically what he's saying.
May I roll up my theme sleeves for a second?
Just roll them up.
No,
Okay.
put him back down.
So I'm actually going to branch out of this story because I feel that
But why?
to stress the theme,
Okay.
to emphasize the theme here. So I was actually listening to Stephen Fry discuss about Americans recently. I was talking about how he loves that Americans have this kind of optimism about them, where he feels that Brits and Europeans in general will view a thing that's similar, the same situation in a kind of more, in a sense, not depressive, but in a
Pessimistic.
fatalistic
Yeah.
fashion, where Americans will have eternal optimism. And there was a similar, I think the generation prior to O. Henry, there was a French writer called Guy de Maupassant, who was a very famous short story, actually very influential in O. Henry. He wrote a short story called The Necklace. And the premise of The Necklace is that a woman wants to, is married to a civil servant, and kind of wants to live above her means. She ends up going to a party and borrowing a necklace, which she thinks is very expensive. All she does is kind of worship the material goods, and ends up losing the necklace. So her husband sacrificed everything in order to buy a replica or the similar necklace in order to give it back to the wealthy woman she borrowed it from, only to find out at the end that it was a costume jewelry, and that they sacrificed everything for nothing. And it's a similar fashion over the idea of sacrifice and material gain, but with two very distinct differences to them. Where O. Henry has kind of an optimism, has kind of a, you can be foolish. It's nothing to be ashamed of,
right?
Because you're doing it for a good cause. This is the same story, but in the French version, it was, oh, what an idiot trying to live above their means. So I think that's a kind of an important distinction to make about that kind of example of the British view of optimism of Americans, is that this is a very optimistic story. Yeah, it's dealing with two love-struck fools, but in the end, they're shooting for something better. And there's nothing, and O. Henry's saying there's nothing wrong with that. And that's where I think really the theme lies there.
Sure, I suppose that's interesting. I guess your information was somewhat relevant. But like, I guess what I said to the way to describe it is, this story is its theme. Like, I mean, everything is in service of it. And again, he even points out unnecessarily the actual moral. Like, why not just have that be the whole story? But you know, like, it's still like that's everything that even his style, everything that all aspects of the story are in service of that theme. And sure, like, it's interesting that writing from his perspective, that's what he's imparting as the moral of this fable, if you will. But I don't know if I still like it. Like, it's well done, but do I agree with that theme? Maybe, maybe not. Probably, I'm inclined to say not. But because it's sort of everything, all the elements elevate it, then I might end up giving it a positive score on that front.
I think you have to...
In light of what you just also...
Maybe this will detract a little, because I know you hate this movie, but...
It's not a movie, though.
No, the movie I'm about to reference. I know
He's going to reveal it.
A Wonderful Life.
Yes.
This is
You're right. It's a sense of that.
That's the old written version of that kind of story.
Right.
This is a Christmas tale. I'm sure that this had that kind of holiday stigma or tradition to it.
You're right. That's a good point. It's a well thought example that, because of who I am, the way I am about it, it doesn't get to me. But I still think it's well executed, I guess. So I may give it credit on that front, even if I don't like the theme. I can still appreciate that it was well done in this story.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. I think that it obviously is a little bit of a saccharine tale of, like, you know, these two foolish lovers, just and I think it's very telling to say that at the end they laugh away the loss of their greatest treasures, like each one of them, and are just happy to be with each other. Whereas, you know, in a story like The Necklace, which I haven't read, but I can imagine it's a much more like, the end of it is probably tears, you know? In
a sense, you're laughing in Get the Magi, you're laughing with them.
Right.
In The Necklace, you're laughing at them.
Right.
Therein lies the big difference in perspective, sure.
Right. Anybody else have anything to talk about with themes?
No.
All right. Let's give them scores. I'm going to give it a 1 for themes.
This one I will give an actual begrudging 1.
I'll give it a 1 as well.
A 1 is, yes.
1's all around. Okay. We're going to move on to whatever you may think is the antagonist. Whatever or whomever you may think is the antagonist. Veronica, start us off.
Jeez. The hair? No.
I like that answer, though. Yeah.
Maybe, but what is the antagonist? Was there really one? I think that they were both so optimistic the entire time that
not poverty.
Can you really?
The fat cats on Wall Street, man, keeping people down.
Obviously, yeah.
I feel like
the bourgeoisie is the enemy.
It seems like they don't let themselves stay down, because it looks like they're maybe with a little struggle. They're
sure. I was just joking
keeping
it
going.
But no, I get your point for sure.
I think if anything, it's too optimistic. The themes are still like everywhere. There's nothing that really plays against these two trying to be happy, except for living, which they seem to enjoy regardless of the struggle.
I would kind of agree with that. I don't know if there is really an antagonist. There's nothing that's difficult about this or like causes her all that much, and it's all about Della. You know, James comes in at the
largely,
end.
yeah.
But I mean, it's all about Della thinking about James. Let's put it that way.
Right.
But even when she's struggling over whether she should cut off her hair, it's never really a choice to her. You know, she knows she's going to do it from the minute she sets out.
Sure. Well, yes. I mean, I'm not going to say anything too against that, because I agree with most of it. But you sort of stole my joke. But yeah, being poor is the antagonist, but that's of course facetious. But I'll just sort of jump the gun again. I'm probably gonna, as I said just before about themes, everything in the story is in service to it. So if they're all like props for it. So just to give you forewarning, I'm probably gonna give a 0 to the next couple of questions just because of that. But I'll say why.
Yeah.
But I mean, I also agree there is no real antagonist.
Right.
Or you could say they're each their own antagonist, but that isn't really true.
That's not true.
They're not working
So-
against each other or anything like that. So if it's sort of absent and or again in service to a theme and folded in. That's the best way I can describe it.
May I ask if maybe the three of you would consider this idea when the wife is describing her husband? They go into detail about the name and how sometimes if they are in certain situations or they're struggling more, it's just D. And then when they seem to be able to put off this face in front of everyone else and everyone else around them, then it's the full last name, which it's escaping me at the moment. But is that maybe the antagonist, this idea that they have to be better than what they
of course,
are?
actually.
So not poverty, but as much as the
Putting on a front,
persona
keeping up with the
that
Joneses.
they would like to continue.
I'm going to one-up you here and claim that Christmas is the antagonist.
Oh my gosh.
That's always true.
Ooh, that's a good one, actually.
I would actually accept
Christmas
that, though.
is the reason that they lose all the treasures.
It's Christmas,
It's the
and I only
catalyst
have
and
$1.87.
I do like that. Like it's funny, but I don't.
It makes sense.
Even then, the having to buy something expensive for people you love because it's
Christmas was bullshit even back then, apparently. But in all fairness, like as funny as I think that is, I still I'm gonna score it on what I just said, and
I agree.
I would agree. I'm well, Veronica, what do you think you're gonna give it?
Well, shit, I just went back on what I was going to say, but
you got convinced. Kind of.
I convinced myself somehow.
See?
I will give it a 1 because it's not over the top. They're not really taking time away from the very brief story that it is, and it serves its purpose. It carries it along, so I'll give it a 1.
Okay.
I'm going to give it a 0.
All right.
Yeah, if Christmas was a viable answer, I would give it a 1, but I'm going to give it a 0 because, it's something you said. This is a podcast we did a while ago, or maybe a couple times. Steve-O, you specifically like, if there's no actual mechanism working against the characters, then it's absent. So that's how I'll have to count it.
Right. That's kind of how I look at it too. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 0 as well. So Veronica's the only dissenter in this one.
She gifted herself a 1.
I like gifts. Go
And
on.
we're going to move on to the protagonist or protagonists, and that's
There's
gonna
only a
be
protagonist.
Ian. I would agree.
Della.
Mm-hmm.
And she was fine. I had mentioned earlier that I disliked some of her kind of dated sensibilities, but I can respect her intent of wanting to get something for her husband. That is a motive for Christmas, that she wants to get something that she thinks will be worthy of him. And meanwhile, it's proven that he's out trying to find something to be worthy of her. It's not the deepest storyline in the world, but I respect her motive, and she sacrifices for him. Although I don't feel she was really...
Does she have an arc is what I'm going to ask you?
Nobody has.
I don't think
an
the point of...
I know,
was
it's a trick question, of course.
And she never seemed all that... It never seemed like a big conflict whether she was going to cut her. I think you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, Steve just said.
So, but overall, I think she was serviceable. I didn't hate her. And I think she moved the story along, so, yeah.
Well, serviceable is the key word there. As I said, she's in service to the theme,
Mm-hmm.
the greater, implications, or, the greater message. So she is only there to exist for that purpose. She's not, she's a one-dimensional character, but because that's the intent of it. Yes. So again, like I said, I'm going to probably have to give it a 0 just because the nature of it.
If she was a two-dimensional character... It would have changed.
It would have been
entirely
a different story. Yeah. Of course, I
storyline.
understand that.
So if she is what she needed to be for this story,
right? But no more, no less. So I'm saying, that's why I gave.
But does that make? That's why
I ultimately gave themes a 1, and on this front, again, she's a prop for that. Which, yeah, of course, she's going to serve her purpose because he did it well. He built a good prop, but that's all she is in service of. Is how I view it.
Well, both of the characters, I think, are kind of in that way.
Yeah, of course.
There's nothing really going on with them. I appreciate this story for the themes and the style and the story of it more than either of the characters, I would say.
Right. That's well said.
I really don't like her, so I'm going to give it a 0.
All right.
All right.
Just on
Just on her
principle
depiction.
alone.
All right, that's fair.
Veronica's giving it a 0. Anybody else have anything else they want to add?
I already gave it a 0.
All right. Ian, you're giving it a 1?
Yeah, I'll give it a 1.
She
I'm
could
gonna-
have bought him something with $1.89. I just want to point that out.
She
Just
could have
not
gone to the
think
dollar
she
store.
She could have purchased something, anything,
could've.
or she could have just gone over the top.
Or
with
she
dinner.
made the better choice by cutting a renewable resource to benefit her husband versus him giving up an heirloom. I think she made less of a sacrifice than he did.
Well,
That's all
she
I'm
did.
saying.
That's all
but
she
that's not her-
had.
That's not her fault.
No, it's
Let's
not
put
her
it-
fault.
It's just upon
That's-
reflection what she had
Yeah,
to work
But
with.
she was the more sensible of the two.
Right. I would agree with that. And speaking of the two, we're going to... Oh, I didn't give my score. I'm going to give it a 0 as well.
All right.
And speaking of the two, we're going to move on to supporting characters.
Of which there are like the lady she sells her hair to, I guess.
And the husband.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess Jim again, but they're all just props for the message, for the fable itself. So, like I said, like then I don't have much to say about this one either because there isn't much there, and what is there, again, unfolds to the theme.
I would completely agree with that. Neither one of the two other characters other than Della that are in this. Was there anybody else? I don't think so.
I don't believe so.
Or much of anything. Like James is obviously the more important of the two, but he's around for about 3 paragraphs and that's about it. And, what's going on in this is more the idea of James is an important thing in this story,
Right.
not him himself.
Themes and abstracts, not the actual.
Which the idea of him is actually makes much more of an impact in this story than he does. So him as a character, I don't think is all that impressive. He kind of looms
Certainly
over
is
the
not.
story for sure, but I don't know if I would give him like his character credit for that.
No, that was very well said.
shouldn't, and yeah, I agree.
Anybody else have anything to say?
I mean, $20 for some hair. I don't know what the price of hair was going at that time.
You got to do the conversion.
Yeah,
like I said.
that's pretty impressive actually. I don't know, like
Her hair was the best hair.
they
ever,
paid
apparently.
$8 rent a month, and they got more than double that for a couple locks of hair.
Hmm.
That's pretty nuts.
I mean, King Solomon was, I guess, a supporting character, and the Queen of Sheba.
They're quick mentions. All right, well let's do the scores for this.
Zero.
Scott, you're giving it a 0. I'm gonna give it a 0. Veronica.
I'll give it a 0. He didn't really do much for me.
Isn't that?
A 0 as well.
All right, 0 is all around, and we're moving on to things that are better than the characters. We're gonna go to dialogue
So you claim.
in this one, and that's gonna be on me. So the dialogue it's interesting because there's not really all that much dialogue, and what there is
Right.
pretty saccharine, like between Della and James, and like I think maybe there's a line or two between her and the woman that buys her hair, maybe.
Yeah, there was like one very
Um,
small exchange.
With
Yeah,
the buy my
but
hair.
that's completely forgettable.
Yes.
So I don't know if I'm gonna count internal dialogue in this.
I would count that in style, or at least I'm counting it in style.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably the way to go. That being said, there's not much dialogue to go off of, and what there is a couple exchanges. There's nothing really to say good or bad. I don't think it was bad dialogue, but it wasn't substantial.
Again, I hate to keep repeating it, but I still think it is applicable to what I said. It's in service of
Right.
what
Of
it's
the
trying to
theme.
say.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
But as a girl, it softened my heartstrings. The little interaction, the little dialogue that we did
All right,
receive.
fine. So if that was intent, then it
it's-
got you. But
Well, it served its purpose, I think.
but
the
I'm-
little that it was there, and I understand that it's for the overall. It serves its purpose,
Right,
and I
exactly.
completely agree with you. But being a girl, I will still
right.
say that I appreciated that.
Yeah.
I'm going to read
That's
off
all fine.
the dialogue between the barber and Della.
okay.
"Will you buy my hair?" asked Della. "I buy hair," said Madame. "Take your hat off, and let's have a sight at the looks of it." $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. "Give it to me quick," said Della.
And that's it.
So
right?
that's the
yeah.
dialogue.
That's the
That's what I'm saying.
extent.
It's all very like straightforward, but again, because that's the framework he's working with. So
I actually do like that, like little exchange, and like the end of it, the "give it
It's
to me
flat.
quick" part is like, let's go. Like you can tell she's like really interested in like getting this done, like make it happen. She doesn't want to do it, but she's more than willing to do
Sure.
it. From that very little bit of dialogue, you get that out of it.
yeah, I agree with that.
I don't think it really did too much for the story. I think it was very bland, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
Sure, I could see where you're reading that, but it's such a quick interaction that you can't really delve really deep into it. I mean, what else could you say
Yeah, that's
about
basically
it?
what I'm saying. Like, they're very surface interactions, but again, because they need to be no more or no less than that, really.
Right, exactly.
Right. I mean,
So that's all.
I'm not even talking
I
about
don't
the
much more
entire
to say about
interaction.
it.
I'm just talking about the give it to me quick part at the end.
All right.
I kind of like it's like the first sentence in the story. You know, like it was $1.87. That was all. Like that type of thing. It's kind of these. Quick,
It has the same rhythm,
it's
I
kind of
guess
these
you're
quick
saying.
little like yeah.
But sure, I think that would go more into style again. So I would
Right.
agree with Ian, who I believe said he's counting it in.
Jim, darling, she cried, don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold it because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim. Let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you. That reads very much like a 1940s style dialogue
yeah.
from
That's
It's a Wonderful Life.
That's
Or-
awesome.
No, like I actually
Scarlett
like that
O'Hara.
considerably less than the
Right.
dialogue with the woman at the barber.
Let me do a
or at
mashup.
the salon or
It's
whatever.
all right, I have a slightly new description based on what you just said. It's a 1940s soap opera. Like if Wonderful Life was a fucking soap opera, that's what the dialogue would be like.
Darling,
Yeah,
say Merry
it
Christmas.
absolutely does have that feel to
But
it.
it was nice. It was nice.
Sure, but it just
and the
it
entire
reads
time,
flat as we
You know,
sort of
sure.
just said.
It reminds
Sure.
me of the final scene from Gone with the Wind.
Yeah.
Where, don't
Yeah.
leave me, Ren. You love me.
I don't give a damn.
Yeah.
frankly.
Frankly, Scarlett.
So, frankly, I don't give a damn
About
about
this
this
dialogue, damn,
Oh,
and
jeez.
damn right.
I would agree. So I'm thinking that Veronica's going to give this a 1 and everybody else is going to give it a 0.
Yeah,
I believe so.
I'm
All
pretty
right.
sure.
All right, so that's where we're at. The scoring is way more like all over the place in this one so far than I thought it would be. By the way.
It's a polarizing story, kind of.
All right, so we're going to move on to style, and we're going to start with Veronica on style.
Okay. I just mentioned earlier that I do have to agree that a lot of the internal dialogue, it does help it move along. I think it really did count where it had to. I think Scott made really good points because the description, it's not over the top, but it's just enough for you to get a really nice idea of your surroundings, of maybe what they look like, maybe how flustered they are, and especially at the end, the interaction between the two, the married couple. I think that really kind of drove it home with how you start. You start with despairing about money, and then at the end, you still know money's type, and yet it's okay. So overall, I enjoyed the style. I liked the descriptions, which are kind of my weak point in stories, and so I'll give it a 1.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. So it's really bizarre when it happens when we give a 0 to dialogue but 1 to style. But again, to repeat one final time, the style is built for its message, and it's not overly elegant in sense, but nor is it
I
crude.
disagree with you completely on
Yeah.
elegance.
Why? Okay, give me an example.
There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl, so Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. Yeah, that's slightly saccharine, but he does have this elegance about him at times
I don't
when
know.
describing the life. He doesn't, I guess,
I see what you mean.
he doesn't do the characters very well, but he describes the world they exist in
Yeah,
very
The
and,
well.
description.
and I
Yeah.
don't disagree with that. And I see what
I
you
would
mean.
agree.
I just don't know if I would. Again, you're disagreeing with me of the use of the word eloquent, but it certainly has, or elegant even, it certainly has a rhythm to it and a feeling to it that is beyond, like, as if it was written by someone else, of course, it wouldn't have the impact I think it does. He knows how to use language, even if it's not like the most, to me, elaborate use of it, but it all fits together perfectly well to elevate it a bit.
So here's like one of the. I'm actually going to read a little part of this as well. This was one of the lines that I really liked, and like felt like
Is
it was
it dialogue
almost,
or is it
no,
just
it's not.
description?
It's not dialogue. It's description, but it felt like almost like he was trying to approach a Shakespearean type part of this, where he says, "In the vestibule below is a letterbox into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dellingham Young." And then it goes on from there. But I think that there are parts of this story which have these lines that are really interesting linguistically, and like, you know, he uses these words,
Yeah, I agree.
puts
with
all
that
these words
in a broad
together
sense.
in such a way that it's really artistic, and it like makes for an awesome sentence, but it's also easy to read quickly, and I can see how it'd be easy to, like, you know, and I think the story is written so that it's easy to like gloss over that stuff
How about this?
and get through quickly
How about
as
it's
well.
very accessible but not dumbed down in any way?
Right.
It's certainly not dumbed down.
Right,
Again, I mentioned earlier.
It's not pandering, perhaps.
He uses vocabulary which is not for easy reading at times.
I don't know. See, I don't know if I agree with that per se, but I'm not. We're agreeing that the style is good, regardless.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
How good?
good enough for a 1.
Definitely good enough for 1 for me.
Yes.
Definitely a 1.
All right. 1s all around. And moving
And
on
now Henry seems to be winning.
to our final topic, final thoughts and recommendations. Ian, you want to kick us off?
This is a short work, and I think it's an important work for American literature in a way. Because O. Henry has this established role as a short story author. He's influential. I think The Gift of Magi is his most influential work, but he has a number of other stories that are...
It's definitely the most famous, I would think.
Yes. In a way, I feel sort of like reading The New Yorker.
Right.
Oh, jeez.
I like that. No, I like that description, sure.
And especially if you read his other work. He wrote about New York. He wrote about snippets of life in there. And so, if you're going to read one thing by him, this is the one to do. And I think it's worth your time. It's going to take you
5 minutes.
5 minutes to
Yeah.
read this stuff.
Well, it's funny if you're probably gonna read it. You're probably gonna be forced to it again. Aside from some of us who are not, this is one I've been wavering on because I read it so many times. Sometimes forcibly, sometimes just happened to come across it again, or maybe I did it in a class in college. Probably did. So it's difficult because when Steve, this is Steve's suggestion, and when he proposed it, the first thing that happened was I just sighed inwardly. And was like, I guess I'll read it again. I haven't read it in years. I still don't have fond memories of it. But even though it's a well-crafted story, it's just not one. It's maybe just not for me, I guess, at the end of the day. Even though I can appreciate it for what it did in literature and what he did as well broadly, it's difficult for me. Like if someone said, "Hey, should I read Gift of the Magi?" I'm like, for the 10,000th time, haven't you already read it? And if there's someone like in Veronica's situation where they actually haven't read it before, I don't know if I'd be like, I don't know if you're gonna like it right now. Like in light of everything it's influenced, because of its shadow has fallen so broad and large that you've probably seen something already that uses it, and you probably like that better because it was more modern.
Well, when I decided to do this one, the reason that I did it was because we've done several short stories now, and we've done a bunch of mid-term classics, I want to call them, from like 70s and on, but we hadn't really read any, I don't think, big classic American short stories.
No, you're right, and that's completely valid.
And that's
why
kind
you
of what
chose
I
it.
wanted to, and that's the reason that I chose it, because I think that it's something that, and I would recommend, I'll just say that right now, I would recommend it because I think it's something that everybody should read, especially when you're younger. I think that the time to read this is at a time when it'll surprise you.
I agree with that.
You know, like that's
To a large
when you
extent.
should read it, when you're 7 years old or something, or like 10 years old. You know, at a time when it'll get you, the twist ending, the quote unquote twist ending will get you, and it'll be a little bit surprising. And I think that's, you know, I think, and like Scott, I've read this several times since the first time that I read it, and every time I come across it, I'm just like, well, what the hell? I got 5 minutes. I'll just read this again. And it hasn't really disappointed me anytime that I've read it. Of course, it ages. It doesn't age the best it's written.
Yeah, I guess that's really good description. That's basically how I approach it. But it's sort of like you were saying you were thinking that he was going for a Shakespearean kind of angle a little bit there. The story has become hoist by its own petard, if you will. like it's so influential. So you've seen it, other variations of it, so many other times that came later that were probably, if not improved upon it, did a more modern twist. So I don't know. That's why I'm saying it's difficult to try to parse this final question out here.
Of course, this type of story, and even probably this story specifically, has been redone probably 100 times.
Yes.
Just
Veronica.
being someone that didn't have to read it 20 times over from what it sounds like, I would say that if I had a choice of picking this up and something else, I would not pick this up. But I think that it served its purpose in the academic area. Like you said, it's been done so many times.
Someone has to invent a trope, or at least, popularize it.
Right. And me reading the story, I started finding similarities in other authors that I've read and other stories that I've read and thinking, oh, okay, well, I see this style. I see this. Okay. All right. Well, I see kind of, and I didn't know that this was where it kind of came from, or, was developed out of. So I'll accept that and I'll understand that. And it should be something that others would read, but I wouldn't recommend it for fun reading or for really an enjoyment, really walking away with it with something.
Sort of broadly how I was, a different way of saying what I was saying. But yeah, so other things, they stood on the shoulders of O. Henry, they stood on his giant shoulders, but I recognized them and like them better than him. But someone had to be the shoulders to be standing on.
Right.
I think this would work best if it was in like a collection of American short stories, like detailing the history of like through the generations.
It's sort of more,
it's
sort of more of an artifact,
Yeah.
even though it's still an important one, I think, for sure. But I just don't know if I would recommend it nowadays anymore.
All right, so Ian, I think you're giving it a 1.
Yes.
Scott and Veronica, I'm not exactly sure what you guys are giving
I'm
it.
still trying to decide last minute here.
All right, well,
I'm gonna say 0.
0, got it.
0.
All right, I've decided, and here's why. As much as I want to give it a 0, I think for purposes of appreciating literary history itself, maybe you have to give it a 1, even if I wouldn't per se recommend it in quotes to other people.
Sure, but you're the audience, and you're saying that it's painful, or not even painful, just pointless,
because I've
really,
through it so many times,
towards the end of it. But really, the first time that you read it, Scott, did you really have the impression of, oh, interesting, he does this, he does that?
Kind of. I read it in like 6th grade maybe or something, but
But you're not giving me an answer. Was it a reaction where you
did I find it
enjoyed
hugely
it?
impressive at the time? I didn't dislike it. I liked it well
The
enough.
vocabulary, well enough. But again, with you, that could be...
I know it's sort of a gray area, sure, but again, like if we're sort of related to why we do narratology, that show, that you have to point to something and say, again, it deserves enough credit, at least on this front, even if I don't personally like it all that much.
I'll accept that answer.
All right, so in an O. Henry-like twist, I think for the first time when we've had this many people, we all gave it the same score.
Really?
We all gave it a 6 for wildly different reasons. Wildly different reasons. So that's going to be an aggregate score of a 6 for O. Henry's Gift of the Magi.
That is the strangest. That is a Christmas miracle.
I know. It's really weird.
We're saluting him by having an odd twist with our scoring.
So for myself, Stephen Ramosi, Veronica,
Hey.
Ian,
Hello.
what are we doing Hayes for? We're saying goodbye.
Oh, bye.
She's
Bye, bye,
She's
bye.
doing an O. Henry twist on you.
Veronica, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Ian
I will give you the gift of wisdom.
and Scotty,
I'm going to cut off my own hair and then buy my own pocket watch. Good night.
good night.
Lots to do about nothing.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. Music by Chris Morgan. Editing and engineering by Stephen Ramosi.
MOTS Ado About Nothing.
This has been a Lost Signals production. All rights reserved.